Greetings and welcome back to Doctor Who Revisited, where I go through every single episode of Doctor Who from 1963 all the way to 2022 and review them. And this next episode is simply titled The Ice Warriors, featuring the debut of the title villains themselves, the Ice Warriors. I love the Ice Warriors as characters in the Doctor Who franchise, be they the villains, the allies of the Doctor, or whatever, just characters in the background. I just love the Ice Warriors. I love seeing them. They have this very iconic, familiar shape, the iconic hissings whenever they speak or, just exist or breathe. I love the Ice Warriors. And as a debut episode for these creatures, in this episode simply titled The Ice Warriors, I think it does a really good job of introducing them. It's very much in that classic Doctor Who style of the title of the episode is just simply the alien beings that it introduces. I think it lasted all the way up to the mid-70s or early 70s. I mean, it pretty much follows in the direction of the Daleks, which was really the first introduction of the Daleks themselves. Obviously, a lot of episodes do follow with that template, like the Sea Devils or the Crotons, and stuff like that. So, as a debut episode, I think this episode really introduces the Ice Warriors in a really good way, and you really can kind of tell why they were so beloved by the audience watching this episode that they brought them back again. Still within the Patrick Troughton era. Now, not only are they one of the few aliens from the 60s that actually came back multiple times within the show itself, and other expanded media stuff all throughout the franchise, but they're also among the very few alien species that actually managed to make the transition from being the generic villain of the week type creatures to being a sort of, at times, unwilling allies, and at sometimes just straight up allies. There are several stories of them just being the good guys, especially in expanded media stuff, to the point where there is literally an Ice Warrior companion of the Doctor at one point or another. You can really kind of tell that this alien race is incredibly versatile, and I think part of that is just with their mannerisms. It's how these guys are written, in the sense that they're not just the generic Martians that want to conquer the world. And yes, they are Martians, so we finally get a proper confirmation that there is an alien civilization from Mars in the Doctor Who world. I mean, it took them a couple of years to get there, but I'm glad that once we actually got a confirmation that that there are Martians, straight up Martians in Doctor Who, it's these guys. It's not just some generic one-off that, just happens to be from Mars. It is an entire species with their own unique lore and mythology and history and proper characterization within the realm of Doctor Who, within the grand scope, the universe of Doctor Who. And I'm glad that they got this much representation and character development within the wider Doctor Who spectrum. And like I said, I think that a big chunk of that comes from how they were portrayed and how they were developed within the grand scheme of things within the story of Doctor Who, particularly on the television show, where, as I said, they're not the straight-up invaders from Mars that want to kill people. No, they were obviously they're warriors. It's literally in their name. They're soldiers. Their planet has gone through hell, metaphorically speaking, and they just went out and came up with this grand planet-spanning empire and just really conquered a lot of the galaxy. And much like the Vikings, because they're literally compared to the Vikings in space in some Doctor Who conversations. Their empire just kind of fell, and very similar to the Silurians, which came later in the game than the Ice Warriors. They just hibernated for thousands of years, not millions of years, but thousands of years, and when they woke up, they found that their empire was kind of lost and forgotten. And so they wanted to reclaim that former glory, and in some Doctor Who stories all throughout the wider Doctor Who range of stories, they've succeeded. And like I said, in a lot of these stories, they're not necessarily the bad guys. In this story, however, they are. And this episode does kind of sort of portray them as the generic bad guys, the run-of-the-mill villains of the week, the monster of the week. I will contend there are a lot of scenes that kind of show that they're not entirely all bad. Like, they do have some method to their madness, a moral code that they refuse to break. I mean, they don't just kill people for the sake of kill people. They don't murder without distinction. All they really want to do, in the grand scheme of things, is just to get their ship out of the ice and go away. And unfortunately, they're threatening a human base in order to do so. Now, putting the Ice Warriors themselves aside for a second, the rest of the story kind of falls into a generic sci-fi story from the 60s of like, oh look, global warming is a thing now. People are aware of it, and so as a result, climate change is a major thing. The whole world froze over, and we gotta regulate the weather from a weather control station in a frozen wasteland. Like I said, not too groundbreaking as far as a sci-fi story, and as a matter of fact, I think a lot of the characters in this story, the human characters I should say, are very one-note and very one-dimensional, very caricatures of the classic slave humans who are enslaved to their government and to their deciding voice, in this case being represented by the machine or the system, whatever it is that they're calling it on the base, and they're just slaves to that computer who tells them what to do. It's a really relevant story, it's a really relevant point of view in that story of how overly reliant humans are on technology, especially today. And remember, this episode was written 50 years ago, give or take a year or two. This episode was written 50 years ago, and it's more relevant today now than it has ever been back in the 60s. And just the over-reliance on technology, very similar to the Cybermen stories from that era of just the humans do not think for themselves. They rely on someone else to tell them what to do and what to think and what to feel, and it's perfectly encapsulated by the people in the base, to the point where they're even willing to kill each other in order to preserve the machine that gives them the orders. And the one person who doesn't listen to those orders, they ostracize him, and he was forced to leave the base, and he keeps coming back every once in a while to steal medicine for his injured friend who is suffering as a result of being in the lower class. It's a very, very, very political episode, and you know, a slap in the face to the people who contend that the classic Doctor Who has never been political. It always has been. Just stop ignoring that. I'm gonna move past that point for now. As far as the Doctor and Jamie and Zoe are concerned, first of all, I love their introduction in the episode of just the TARDIS landing on its side, and they have to climb out of the TARDIS. That's not really something you see a lot in Doctor Who. Obviously, in the Matt Smith era, we've seen it a couple of times. I mean, it's literally his introduction into his first episode, sort of. But yeah, it's a really fun comedic moment, and I love Jamie's interactions with Victoria in this episode. First of all, we can kind of see that, unfortunately, Jamie is a product of his time, as evidenced by the way he's, shall we say, taken aback by the wardrobe choices of some of the women in the base, and his desire to maybe possibly see Victoria in such a unique wardrobe that is very much a product of the 60s. Yeah, like I said, product of his time. Both Jamie the character and just, I suppose, the show in general. But I do love how Victoria reacts to his questioning about the wardrobe choices. Of course, Victoria is of a much more elegant and upper class type of people from, again, product of her time. And so she doesn't take any nonsense from men like that. Let's put it that way. So I love how she reacted to that moment. Other than that, I think this is one of Victoria's weaker stories. It's one of those episodes that unfortunately really just highlights some of the flaws of the character. I liked Victoria before my rewatch, but this rewatch right now, and full disclosure, right now I'm all caught up to several episodes after she left the Doctor. I will say this, I think this character has really fallen down a few notches for me personally on this rewatch, because it's really just a character whose main role was to get captured a lot and to be saved by the men in the stories. And while I do realize that Polly used to do that also very often in her travels with the Doctor, there were several different episodes that really highlighted her strength as a character in a way that she overpowered a British Redcoat officer and sort of forced him to do what she told him to do. She definitely had a brain. She defeated some Cybermen on her own, sort of with the help of Ben. She was a much more empowering, strong, confident female character than Victoria. And I think Victoria does have some good moments, but unfortunately not a lot of them in this episode. But either way, her getting captured is a pretty major plot point in several of the different parts of this serial, which kind of forced the Doctor to go and save her. But her screaming, in a way, her being the classic damsel in distress who screams a lot, actually is used as the weapon in this episode. So I guess maybe that was the intention. I guess it wasn't really the writer's intention to portray her as the weak female character that needed to be rescued a lot. It's just her screaming was the part of the character, and the reason why the Doctor and friends got out of a lot of scrapes in those times. I don't know. Either way, not a big fan of Victoria in this episode specifically. She does have several episodes coming up that I think portray her in a much better light. But overall, like I said, I love the Ice Warriors' interactions with the other characters in this episode. I think it's a really good demonstration of what the Ice Warriors are capable of in this episode. Obviously, their lore is being much more expanded upon in later episodes, especially towards the 70s. Not a big fan of the human characters in this story, and just really cool, fun, and character interactions between the Doctor and companions. That's really all I can say for now about this episode. Let me know what you think about the debut of the Ice Warriors. First of all, I love the opening of each individual episode of just showing us this icy wilderness with the title of the episode over this operatic singing voice in the background. I really dig that. I think it was really, really good and fun. But yeah, that's basically it. There's nothing else I can add to this review. So let's wrap this up and move on to the next one. So until the next one, everybody. Hi there! Thank you for watching the video. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'll see you next time.